Hello, welcome to this interview of Sarah Wallace. As you will see, I am joined by Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yes, I'm Sarah Wallace. I am a queer author living in Orlando, Florida, and I write queer historical fantasy stories.
Yes, you do. And I have one of them just here, Letters to Half Moon Street, which was my introduction to your works. But you have just had another book come
Yes,
out, The Education of Pip. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
yes, I would love to. So, The Education of Pip is the third book in my Metal and Men series, and it continues the story of a secondary character we meet in the second book in the series, One Good Turn. And it's basically about Pip, who is a young man who's had a kind of traumatizing and very difficult life. And it's about him getting a second chance at a new life. And so the education of Pip is basically referencing his learning to trust himself again, learning to trust other people again, and learning to be happy after a very long time of being miserable and lonely.
Yeah, it's definitely an emotional one,
Yes.
but definitely a worthwhile one as well. I'm really glad we got to see his story, and I look forward to seeing him again. And you mentioned there that this is the third book in the Meddle and Mend series. So the first book is Letters to Half Moon Street, the second is One Good Turn, and the third is The Education of Pip. But where did the idea for the Meddle and Mend series come from?
So it's actually kind of come about in a piecemeal sort of a way. I wish I could say I had this really grand idea for the whole thing. It didn't happen. So the first story I wrote actually wasn't the Letters to Half Moon Street. It was a short story that is now a novelette that I offer to newsletter subscribers for free, called The Glamorous Spell of Rose Talbot. And I wrote that in grad school. I was trying to come up with a new story because I felt like I hadn't written very much in a long time, and I felt like I didn't have any stories left to tell, which is fun. Um, and I was like, I don't have anything original to say, and so I came up with this story, which was kind of where I was. The stories I wanted to read was I wanted to read something that was like a Regency sort of story, kind of with like a Georgette Heyer type of humor, but like I wanted magic in it. And I also wanted to be queer because that's what I primarily read. And so I wanted to have like a queer Regency fantasy romance. And so I wrote that with The Glamour Spell of Rose Talbot. And then I had so much fun writing it that I was like, I need to write a whole bunch of these. So I wrote Letters to Half Moon Street after that. That was originally supposed to be a short story. It very quickly was not a short story. um, and then it gradually became a novel length story. And
And
then
it's the longest one, right?
yes,
Right.
currently the longest
Yeah.
one. Book
Yeah.
four is gonna have it beat. Book four is about 85,000 words,
Okay.
and Letters to Half Moon Street's about 65,000 words, so it's a significantly longer book. Um, but yeah, so Letters to Half Moon Street's currently the longest story in the series. Um, and One Good Turn was a story that I had an idea that I had like years ago that I kind of had held on to, and then I thought, oh, this is a good opportunity to use the idea. So I used that. Book three was originally part of book two,
Mhm.
and they were originally like one long book, and it was kind of disjointed. So I split it in half and made it two separate books. Um, Books four and five are going to follow two of Gavin's siblings, the main character from Letters to Half Moon Street. And so, like, when I was writing Letters to Half Moon Street, I knew I wanted Seb and Jerry to have their own books. But the rest of the series, it's going to be 8 books total. But the rest of the series were either stories that I felt I wanted to continue telling, like didn't feel completely finished, so I'm adding to them kind of like an epilogue type of book. And then the other two, so that's one of the books, and the other two, last two, are going to be characters that I just want to tell their stories. So the Jukeks of Mulberry is going to get their own book.
Oh,
Um,
yay.
and I'm not going to tell the other character because there's kind of a spoiler still. But
Okay.
but yeah, I'm excited.
Yay. That all sounds really great. And you've mentioned that you wanted to write queer Regency romance, and there is really fantastic queer rep in the series. And I found the series because I was looking for books with demisexual rep, and there aren't a lot of those. And I found your books, and I just loved it, and the representation was so great. So how do you make sure that you're doing that representation well and you're doing it justice?
First off, thank you so much. I'm so glad you like the demisexual rep for Gavin. So with some of the rep, if it's not rep that I personally have any experience with, then I do hire sensitivity readers for that. The Jukeks of Mulberry, I had their pieces, their sections were all read by somebody. I have a trans love interest in book 4, and his sections were all read by a sensitivity reader. Nell, who's aromantic, her whole book was read by a sensitivity reader to make sure that I was telling that identity well. The demisexual rep, I actually am also demisexual. A funny thing with that particular rep is I didn't actually initially intend to make him demisexual, but I kind of accidentally did because I put parts of my own self in.
Yeah.
I don't. He's not me at all, but there were parts of it, like there's a scene in the book where Charles kisses him for the first time, and he has like a whole little monologue to his sister where he's like, I've never thought of kissing before. It's just something that never crossed my mind. I don't imagine kissing people. And that was completely from my own personal experience where when I read romance novels and they're like, oh, and their lips are so beautiful, I couldn't. I'm like, I never think of that. Even people are attractive. My mind doesn't go there. So I put that in there because that's something that I've experienced. I thought that'd be kind of fun to have a character have that. And an early reader of the book was like, he's reading as demisexual. Was that intentional? And I'm like, no, but that works. And so then I went back and made it on purpose. Then it became an intentional thing.
Well, I'm glad you did.
I do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that it was unintentional, because I feel like demisexuality is something that you don't realize is a thing until you hear the term, and then it's like, hold on, my whole life makes sense now.
Yes. It was. I think it was one of the labels that really makes me feel very pro labels, because when my friends told me demisexual, like told me about demisexuality, it was like self-defining in a way where I was like, oh, like I've had so many years of people being like, well, why don't you just go to a club and find somebody if you really want, like if you want to find a partner, just do this. I don't know, why don't you just go on a dating app? And like I've had like all these like well-intentioned friends and family say these sorts of things and have somebody like, oh no, there's an actual word for it. And I was like, oh my God, thank God. So
right. Absolutely. I mean, it's the same for me. It was very much sort of my friends would be like, oh, that person's so hot, and I'd be like, okay, if you say so. I don't really get it, but sure. And I just thought I was weird. And I am weird, like that's fine too, but I'm not weird alone.
Right.
So you've managed to include lots of different types of representation so far in the series. Are there any types of representation that you haven't managed to include yet, but that you really want to explore?
Yes. I would like to continue including representation of different identities under the LGBTQIA+ umbrella. So I would like to. I have a character who is on the asexual spectrum but is romantic, and I have a character who's aromantic but is not asexual. So I'd like to have kind of continue to explore those like nuances. Like I want to have a character who's aro and ace, and I'd like to do a couple of characters like that because I feel like sometimes those characters can fall into cliches. So I'd like to be able to have very different characters who are aro ace. And I have in some books that I have written that aren't out yet, like I said, I have a trans love interest. I have a pansexual character. I have a demi-romantic character. And I would like to also be a little bit, possibly not with Metal and Men series, since that's a lot of it is already kind of planned out, but I would like to be better at disability rep as well. That would take a little bit more research on my part, so that's probably going to be a series 2 thing that I work on, is doing a little bit more research, and so that I can include disability rep sensitively and well. And so that's going to take a little bit more work to do that. And I'll definitely need sensitivity readers for that, since I don't have as much experience. I do have some experience in that I have I have social anxiety, which like Gavin does. Um, and I like Pip has deals with some depression after some of his trauma, and a lot of his
Understandable.
experiences with depression were pulled also from some of my experiences with depression. He has like spiraling thoughts, which is something I deal with all the time. And so I have some disability rep that I've kind of put in there, but I'd like to do more of that. So those are like the primary representation I want to be able to include.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely found Gavin really relatable in that way as well. He's so introverted and shy and socially awkward, and I'm like, yeah, that's me. You are me, but in a Regency romance.
Thank you. It's similar. And it's funny actually with Gavin in particular because I've had several readers either leave it in reviews or reach out to me and ask me if he is autistic. And
Mm,
initially I was like, well, that wasn't my intention. I won't say he isn't, because if you read him that way, that's valid, but I didn't intentionally do that. And I have come to realize like I'm learning that I think I might be autistic.
oh, okay.
And so it's interesting because I might have unintentionally
Yeah.
coded him as an autistic character. My only regret with that is that if I had done that intentionally, I probably would have changed the way Charles wooed him. He probably would have been a
Yeah.
little bit gentler if I had been doing it more mindfully. So that's like the one thing I kind of ish regret with that book is that he wouldn't have pushed and fight so hard to like step out of his comfort zone. But I mean, I didn't know that about myself, so I didn't think to fix that. So maybe next time. All right.
Yeah. Life is a journey.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've mentioned already that you have plans for books for some of the characters that you have already written into the series. So the siblings and the Dukex. And I've seen on social media you mentioned that you have plans for this to be a fairly long series and there to then be a second series. Can you tell us a little bit more about your structural plans for Meddle
Yeah,
and Mend?
I'd love to. So Meddle and Mend is going to be an 8-book series. Um, and the book 5, there are 2 protagonists in book 5. So it's also a romance. And one of the protagonists is a character we've already met, Jerry Hartford, and then her love interest is going to be the oldest of 8 siblings. And
Wow.
so book 5, it's kind of a not necessarily intentionally Bridgerton, but like kind of like that whole like big family romance novel story. And so book 5 is going to be both book 5 in Meddle and Mend and book 1 in the second series.
Okay.
And so the majority of the second series is going to take place after Meddle and Mend because his siblings are all significantly younger than he is.
Mhm.
But it will serve as an introduction to the characters for series 2. So that will be fun.
Ah, okay. That is super fun. How exciting. And do people need to read these books in publication order or not?
They don't. It's probable that they will like them. They might be a better reading experience to read them in order, just because you meet characters that come later. Book 2, I think, is pretty easily standalone, where we it's a brand new protagonist, and there are past characters who are brought back in, but you don't really have to have read that book to really like understand what's going on.
Mhm.
Um, and I try to with each book, I try to have a beta reader read it who hasn't read at least the book prior.
Mhm.
So book 4, I had a beta reader who hadn't read books 2 and 3 yet. She'd only read book 1, and I had beta readers for book 5 who had only read book 1 and hadn't read 2, 3, or 4. So I'm trying to. Book 6 will actually probably need to be read in at least after book 3, but I think it's possibly a better experience to read them in order, but it's not necessary. I've read reviews and talked to readers who have read them in multitude of orders, and
Yeah.
they seem to. I'm trying to make them work as standalones as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're looking for a specific type of representation, you probably want to start with that one, and that's probably okay. But I
Mhm.
definitely think having read Letters and Turn first gave education much more gravitas to me. And there is a particular scene in the education of Pip that I was so excited for. I was like, yay! this is happening. So I won't say what it is, of course, but I think it is a little bit like that. I always think of it a little bit like the Marvel universe, right? You don't have to watch those films in order, but if you do, you're going to get just a little bit more
Yeah.
out of it.
Yes, I try to layer the characters a little bit as the stories progress. So, with Birdie as an example, he's a character you meet in book one, and he's a side character. He's the love interest's best friend. So, we meet him very much as the love interest of the best friend. And in book two, he's changes to a bit more of a I'm completely blanking on the word, but he's more of like a sorry if you think of the word, but like he's like basically kind of like not guardian, but he's like helping like this guide for the protagonist in book two. And then in book three, he kind of starts to develop as like not quite a romantic interest, but kind of ish edging into that territory. So so his character sort of changes depending on which character is the main character in the book.
Okay. And so Letters is epistolary, which I actually didn't realize until I started reading it, which I really should have, because it's literally called Letters to Half Moon Street. But I was like, oh, it's epistolary. And I think, is book 4 going to be called Dear Bartleby? Am I remembering that right? So is that one epistolary as well?
So it is. It's epistolary, but in a slightly different format. So it's epistolary in journal entries. And the Dear Bartleby will make sense in the story. It's explained pretty early on. I love, as you could probably tell, I love epistolary format stories. I think they are very fun to read, and they're very fun to write. They're very challenging to write, but they're very fun to write because it's a different type of unreliable narrator, because how unreliable the narrator is depends on who they're talking to. And I think that is, and you get different glimpses into the character depending on which character they're talking to. I think that's very fun. Book 7 is also going to be epistolary letters again, which I'm very excited about writing, but I'm also intimidated because now I know how difficult it is. So I have to work myself up to that one so that I can actually write it and not scare myself from writing it. But I think it will be a lot of fun.
Oh, good. Yeah, at least you've got a couple of books until you're there.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you have a favorite that you've written so far, either from like a writing perspective or a character perspective or a story perspective?
I have a bunch. Which is not really a good answer. Letters is one of my favorites because I'm very, again, like epistolary is pretty challenging to write. I was very proud of myself for accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish with it. I feel like I was really proud of the writing of that one. And book 4, which is going to come out in September. And that one I'm also very proud of because I think it's probably one of my best character arcs. And the main feedback I got from beta readers for book 4 was that the character development for the protagonist was really, really good. So I'm very excited about people reading that one. And book 5 is also one that I'm proud of, in that, like, as I was writing it, I kept thinking, like, this feels like the best stuff I've ever written, but it's also a complete mess. So like that one still needs some work before it's going to be ready for people to read it. But while I was writing it, I was feeling very proud of it in the works. So I'm very excited about that one too.
I love that for you.
Thank you.
Is there a particular book that you're most looking forward to writing that you have planned?
A couple. So book 7 is one that I'm intimidated by it, but I am excited about it. One of the protagonists is this kind of chaotic sort of character that is just going to the kind of character that's very fun to read, but I've never written a character quite like this, where he's just going to be sort of all over the place and just has like these pretty wild ideas of how he's going to get his happily ever after, and he's just going to do all these really weird things. I think that will be fun. So I'm excited about writing his character. And in series 2, so quick addendum that I wrote a lot of these books in 2020 and in 2021. Like a lot of people had a lot of anxiety about what was going on in the world, and I basically handled that by hyperfixating on writing books. And so I wrote the bulk of like books 1 through 4 I wrote in like 6 months. It was rough drafts, so these are not were not polished at the time, but I just like beasted them out. And then I also I wrote book 6 in like 2020 or 2021. And then I wrote parts of book 5 early on. And I started even writing books in series 2 back in 2021. And one of the books in series 2, which I need to go back and clean it up a lot, and I have to finish it, but I'm very excited about it, is kind of a queer retelling of Beauty and the Beast-ish, very loosely. But there's no like curse in terms of physical attributes, but it's a character who's cursed, and the main character is basically the only one who can break the curse, but neither of them realizes it. And the protagonist in that one is part of like a magical detective duo. And so I think that will be really fun. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of a Beauty and the Beast retelling while also being like a mystery at a country party, house party kind of thing. And so it's like a mishmash of different genres that I enjoy. But I'm very excited about getting back to that one and finding out what happens and figuring out how to pull it all together, because I was having a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, that sounds really, really fun. It'll be really fun to read as well, I'm sure.
I hope so.
And so you've published all of these books so far by yourself, so you self-published them. What made you decide to go down the self-published route with your books?
So it was there were a bunch of decisions I weighed. I did attempt to get letters traditionally published. I didn't try very hard. I sent it to one publisher. At the time, I already had like 7 of the books mapped out. And so I already knew I wanted it to be a series, and I knew exactly how I wanted the series to go, and several of the books were already written. And so the one publisher I submitted to accepted series submissions. And when I was doing research on how to, because part of the submission process was if it was going to be a series, to write a series summary. So I was trying to do research on how to write a series summary. And a lot of the places I was looking at were like, well, don't tell them there's going to be a series, because you have to be ready to be flexible and you have to be able to change your mind. I'm like, well, I'm not, though. That's not going to happen. So I submitted it. It got rejected. I was devastated. And then I talked to my sister, who's an indie musician, and because I knew she had gone through a similar decision-making process. And I was like, I don't know. I think I went to indie publish, but it's so expensive. And like it's a lot of work. I don't know if I can succeed at it. And like, but I also know that like it's more important to me to be able to make all the decisions in the creative part of the series. And so she ultimately obviously advised me to do indie publishing, because if creative control is a priority for you, then just do that. If you want to do traditionally publish a book, then write a book that you don't feel as like it's not a passion project for you, and submit that. And then it won't feel as hard if it gets rejected. I haven't done that yet because I'm too busy writing books I'm passionate about. But it is expensive doing it the way I'm doing it. But I don't know. I like being able to publish it exactly as I want to. There are things I wish I had more means to do. Like I wish I could do hardcover books. Those are kind of expensive to do. I wish I could. I like my covers. I design my own covers, and so I'm kind of proud of them. But yeah, thank you. But it would be cool to have like characters on the cover or something, so that it was a little bit more evident that it was a romance. But that's pretty expensive. So like maybe someday down the line, if I have the money to do special editions with characters, then that would be amazing. But in the meantime, this is working out. So
yeah. And you also have audiobooks for all of your books, which isn't super common with self-published books, presumably because it's expensive to do. Was it important for you to have these books available by audio, and was it difficult to make that happen?
So yes, it was important to me kind of at the beginning. That was one of the things that was weighing in my mind, was the challenge of like, I have several friends who pretty much only read by audiobook. And I knew even then that there are lots of people who audiobook is just more accessible to them in terms of like how busy they are or disabilities. And so I knew I wanted to be able to do an audiobook so that the books were accessible to anyone who wanted to read them.
Mhm.
And the sister, when I talked to my sister about it, it was like, it's just expensive because I was doing research and it says you get to pay a narrator this much. And she was like, I've done audiobook narration and you can probably find a narrator who's willing to work for a lower budget. Just tell them up front what it's going to be. And if you can't find anybody, which is unlikely, then you can raise it up incrementally until you get to something that works for both of you.
Mhm.
And so I did it that way. And I actually was able to find people who, my first amount that I offered, I usually say, like, when I do like a little call sheet, I say how much I'm willing to pay per finished hour. And I say approximately how long I think the book is going to be, so that when the narrators audition, they're aware from the beginning this is going to be like a $300 project sort of thing. So they're
Mhm.
not feeling cheated at the end of the project. So that's worked out really, really well. And I've also kind of, I have friends who are actors or friends who are friends with actors. And so all of the people who have narrated my books, the first narrator is somebody I met, and he's like a Shakespeare actor. And then the second and third narrators, the narrators for the second and third books, are friends of a friend who's an actor, and she has a whole bunch of actor friends. And when I was talking to her about this series, and she was like, I had lots of friends who are out of work actors and who really could use like even a small job would be
Mhm.
helpful to them. So I've been doing that, and it's been nice to be able to hire somebody who I know can use, like, even if it's $250, that's helpful to them.
Mhm.
It's kind of nice to be able to do that. I wish I could pay people more, but right now this is what I can afford. Um, so that's what I've been doing. And I just submit it through. There is, by the way, for anyone who is watching it, who is also either an indie author or looking to be an indie author, there you can do it the way I did it, where find out a budget that works for you, and you can probably find actors. They may not be like, not that my actors are not good, but they may not be like, well-known actors or anything. But you can still find talented people who are willing to work for a lower budget. And both ACX and Findaway Voices, and possibly Authors Republic, which are ACX is a specifically Audible Amazon audiobook distributor, and Findaway Voices and Authors Republic are both distributors that distribute audiobooks to different vendors, different sites. I use Findaway Voices, and I think all three of them have the option of a royalty share, which means you don't pay any money up front. And so it's a bit of a risk because it means neither of you might make any money. but but it's also nice because if you have no money up front, you can still like find a narrator who's willing to take a risk on your book,
Mhm.
and they'll narrate it for free, but then you split the royalties between yourself and the narrator, which is it's a nice way to be able to do it. Again, it's a gamble because if you
Mhm.
don't make any money, neither of you have made money, but it's also a gamble in that if you make lots of money, all your money is cut in half by the narrator. But so you have to weigh the pros and cons of that.
Mhm.
Um, but that's an option too if you are looking to have audiobooks for your books. Because it is like, now that I have them, I wouldn't want to do it any other way. Again, for the
Yeah.
accessibility, and it's also a very like unique and incredible experience to be able to hear your own words
Mhm.
spoken back to you is really
Yeah.
amazing. So like that still hasn't gotten old. So I don't know. I really love having the audiobook.
Yeah, I'm really glad that there are audiobooks, because I am one of those people that predominantly reads via audio. I'd say 99% of my
Yeah.
reading is by audio, so I'm really grateful for that. So you say you've either met or that your narrators have been friends of friends. So are they all American or are any of them British?
They're all American.
They're
The
doing really well with the accent. As a British person, I can say
I'm
they're
so
doing really well.
the narrator for Turning Light, the narrator for book one is so he's actually kind of a cool story is he and his wife are both actors for like the Kentucky Shakespeare Company, and so they are like trained Shakespeare actors, that's what their jobs are. It's very, very
Mhm.
cool. And I met him and his wife on very, very specific thing on the Turner Classic Movie cruise years ago. And we met because we all three of us love old movies. And as we were like getting off the boat, we like shared information, and so we've become kind of friends, like Facebook level friends. And it's really cool to be able to have kept that connection. And it worked out beautifully when I was holding auditions for my books, and Gregory was like, "Oh, I'd be interested." I'm like, "What? That's cool." So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, well, they're absolutely smashing it. So hooray. And that's really nice, because often the British accent just gets completely
Yes.
brutalized by American actors. Sorry. So
No,
it's really nice that that's not the case.
It's one of the reasons I haven't done any book readings, and not like anyone's clamoring for me to do book readings, but like when I thought of doing future like release parties, if I do it at a bookstore or something, like, are they gonna want me to read it? And if they do they want me to read it in an accent? Because that's not gonna be great. Like I'm not I'm not gonna pretend I can do a good British accent. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I have other people, can I just play the audiobook for you?
Yeah, good call, good call. And you're also working on a collaborative story at the moment. So can you tell us anything about that one at all?
Would love to. So I'm working on a collaborative story with another author, S. O'Callahan. She's another indie author. She has 2 books out, Fella Enchanted and Fella Ever After. And I had read Fella Enchanted when she reached out to me. We'd been Instagram friends up until this point. And her book is a queer historical fantasy romance taking place in Ireland in like the late 19th century. And I had posted a tweet, like an Instagram post of a tweet on Instagram in my stories that was like essentially writers, I want a historical romance about 2 rivals who write letters, gossip about each other to their local society papers. And then the writer gets back at them by announcing they're engaged and they can't back out. And I shared that to my Instagram stories and was like, this would be so fun. And then Shannon responded to the story, and she was like, we should write that together. And it was just so beautifully perfect that we're both writers of queer historical fantasy romance. We both like cozy fantasy stories and like softer kind of romance stories. And so it was just, like, as soon as she messaged me, I was like, oh, that would be amazing. And it's been incredible. I would have been nervous writing, like I've considered, like wondered what it's like to co-author with somebody, and I would have always assumed it'd be difficult because like you have to go back and forth over, like, I have an idea of the story and you have an idea of the story and they're not the same, and how do we work through those kinks. And it's been so great. Like, she's like, we both plan differently, but it's been kind of working where she had an idea for the story like from the beginning, where she was like, the day after we decided to do this, she like plotted out like, here's how we can do the story, and it was like a page long like summary of what the story could look like. I'm like, oh my god, which is not something I do. I'm like, I don't know, and then like they fall in love. But like as we've been working, like I've been doing more like, we've been planning a lot together, but I'll be like text her like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like, okay, so here's an idea. What if we do blah blah blah? And she's like, oh, that's perfect. So like it's been so great, and it's a multiple point of view story. So with the premise having society papers, we have a third point of view where it's the journalist writing the story. So you get the columns every now and again, and then you get the 2 points of view of the 2 main characters. And it's a similar world to what I write. Regency period England, with that's queer normative, because that's what I prefer. I'm gonna do magic. Let's just make it queer normative too. And they're fae in this world, and fae and humans live alongside each other, and they get along-ish in that there's no violence, but they don't actually like each other very much. And so one of the characters is fae and one of the characters is human, and so they don't like each other, in part because of this like however long centuries long feud between the 2 factions. And so it's enemies to lovers, except neither of us like writing conflict very much, so they're very quickly not enemies, but enemies to friends to lovers. But it's been super, super fun. We're actually probably going to finish the rough draft soon. And I don't know when it's going to be released. We're tentatively looking at January for a release date. So more to come on that. We don't have a title for it yet, but we're really enjoying it. So
And presumably you're self-publishing it together.
Yes, yeah. We're self-publishing that, same names, so it won't be like a new combo name or anything. So anybody who knows my books will be able to find it when they look me up, and same with her. I do recommend her books if you haven't read them yet. They are really fun.
I haven't, but I will check them out.
Yes, they're good, and they're on Kindle Unlimited if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. So, yeah.
Awesome. And aside from that, and aside from Meddle and Mend series 1 and 2, do you have any other sort of ideas that are cooking in your brain, future writing plans?
I do. I have a few. So I have a potential third series to Meddle and Mend I might do of like next generation of like the Hartfords and their friends and everything. Not Gavin because he doesn't want kids, but like everyone else who has kids, their kids are going to have stories, probably. And then I have two other ideas that are similar but not quite the same. Is I'm a big fan of old movies, and so I would love to. I wanted to do for years. I wanted to do a fantasy story or series set in a version of like old Hollywood with magic, because I would love to sort of explore what it'd be like for magic to exist during like the 1950s and everything. I think that'd be really fun to play with. So that's one idea. I just don't have any. I'd have to do a lot of research, which I'm not super interested in doing right now. So it's not hasn't happened. It might take a while before that happens. And then the other idea I have is I have a running list on my phone, my notes app, of different old movies that I like that either have queer subtext in them or with like just a little bit of a push, they could be queer. And so I'd really love to rewrite those, adapt those stories for a novel form, but make them queer stories. And I think that could be very, very fun. So
yeah, for sure. I can definitely think, with old films, I think it's quite easy to just go, just nudge this a little bit, and we're there.
Yeah. I was introducing Singing in the Rain to one of my best friends a few months ago, and we're watching it together. And if you've ever, I don't know if you've seen Singing in the Rain, but we're watching it, and she's like noticing that like Dawn Lockwood and Cosmo Brown, she's like, they have really good chemistry. I'm getting, and I'm like, yeah, same. And so like we decided together that it was going to be a Dawn, Cosmo, and Kathy were going to be a little throuple, and it was going to be beautiful, and they were just going to all get along very nicely. And we're like, it writes itself. And so like the whole movie we're watching, we're like, yeah, see there, yep, and they all would be great together. So that would be a really fun one to write as a queer romance. Would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. My final question for you is not to do with writing or books, just a little bit of fun from one cat lady to another. Can you tell us about your cat?
Absolutely. So his name is Professor Dobson. I would tell you, but he's sleeping as usual. And he's an older cat. He's about, gosh, actually, I'm really terrible at remembering how old he is. I think he's about 13 years old or so now, 12 or 13. I spent like years thinking he was 7 years old, and then I took him to the vet recently, and I was like, yeah, he's 7. And I pulled up my vet records from like 3 years prior, and I was like, oh, I said he was 7 then. Okay, so obviously can't be 7 now. I guess he's like 10 or 11 now. So I think he's like 10 or 11 years old. But he was a rescue that a friend of mine actually rescued him, and he belonged to my friend for a while. And then he was super unhappy not because of her, but because she has 2 dogs, and he didn't really like having to live with the dogs. And so she had mentioned she was going to try to find another home for him. And I had another cat at the time. And I was like, oh, I've been kind of thinking of finding another cat to keep my other cat company. So I got him for that. So my other cat, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. But so now it's just me and Dobson. And but yeah, he's really cute. He's very sweet. And I'm trying to think. He has like, if I ever show pictures of him on Instagram, he's got a very grumpy looking facial expression at all times. So I like to call his resting pissed face. He's not actually probably never angry. He just always looks very angry about everything. And he's super chill. He's like, my nibblings will come over and pet him, and he like is cool with that. And one of my nibblings taught him how to sit with a treat. And I was like, what? How did you? So he's a very chill cat. He's very sweet.
Yeah. I have two cats, and they both will sit on command, and for a treat they'll even stand up on their hind legs.
Oh my
It's
god,
very cute.
that's so cute. I didn't ever occur to me to try to train him with that, and I came back from vacation, and my nibbling was like, "Look," and they sent me a video of them with my cat, and they're like, "Okay, sit," and he like sits all cute, and then she like put the little treat on the floor, and I'm like, "Oh my god, well I'm gonna try that now." So now I throw it out to everyone who comes over. I'm like, "Look, my cat can do tricks."
So cute, so cute. Hooray for cats.
Yeah.
And
That's one thing
hooray for
actually.
queer books.
Favorite queer books, and also that is something that I haven't. Speaking of representation, that I do want to. I want to put animals in my books more. I'm not very good at ever thinking about that. But one of the books I have in mind, I would love to have one of the characters end up with a kitten that she doesn't know what to do with, and that suddenly this kitten is like wreaking havoc in her life as kittens do. And I think that could be very fun to write.
Yeah.
Um, so so that's a series 2 plan as well, is to
Oh,
hopefully put more animals into my books.
yay. Just make it even more cute.
I'm gonna try.
Well, thank you so, so much,
Thank you so
Sarah,
much for having
for
me.
joining us. If you haven't already, please make sure to check out Sarah's books. I am going to put all of the details down in the description box for you, and you can go and give her a follow on Instagram as well, which will also be linked down below. Thank you again so, so much, Sarah, for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And that's it for this one. Thank you so, so much for watching. And if you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button. Bye for now.